is that this is a race between, on the one side, our rapid financial crisis spinning out of control and our economy plummeting, and this so-called war with Iran of air and missile power. And the question is, which one gives way first? And I think the air and missile power war could conceivably outlast the financial crisis. But the point is, once you hit the financial crisis, everything stops. So what we're seeing right now from Iran is a very methodical approach to targeting. And they're targeting the things they said they would. And they're going after the statelets. Great thing. And note that Kuwait in particular has been a very, very popular target for Iran. And I predict when this war ends, whenever it does, that Kuwait will cease to exist. It'll simply become part of Iraq, which is kind of interesting given that we fought a war to prevent that, did we not?
I was thinking that very thing, actually, yes.
And then
how ironic it was.
Stateless, you see the same thing. They're going after those things, but we also have the shaping operation, which is to prepare Israel for attack. Their assumption is that they'll have to go back and attack Israel because Israel's not going to sit there quietly. At some point, there will be another resumption of operations there. And I think it's very clear the Iranians want to systematically remove all the radars and all the missile batteries and so forth. And the same thing is true up and down the coast, from across from Karg Island all the way down to Chabahar. So that, the opportunity, unfortunately, for some kind of land operation seems very real.
Well, as a matter of fact, that is starting to become more and more spoken. We had Professor Morandi on yesterday, who did not hesitate to say he thought that maybe not Iran per se, but the resistance fighters in Iraq could move on Kuwait. He said that openly. The Houthis in Saudi Arabia, in the southwestern corner of Saudi Arabia, could move in. And then here, this just in the last, I guess this was just last night, the resistance affairs experts, the rulers of Arab countries should know that Iran has no fear of conducting ground operations against them. I was looking this morning at some of the targets that have been hit overnight, and I've noticed a lot more are being hit on border control points in Kuwait, which makes it look more and more like something's coming. The fact that they're talking about this openly on Iranian television, that seems to imply that there is serious possibility to that. Now, that would seem just out of the ordinary. Iran is just trying to hunker down and survive, but now there's actually talk that they may go on a ground offensive. Do they have that capability?
Yes, they have the capability to overwhelm not just Kuwait, but they could go after the other Emirates. Remember, the only thing that really stood between the various statelets in the Gulf and Iran for years was American military power. We essentially picked up the British mission. The British mission, after they created these little statelets, was to ensure that the oil states would be protected so that the oil would flow freely down through the Persian Gulf, up through the Suez, and then off to Europe and Great Britain. So that makes perfect sense. And the Arabs have demonstrated pretty conclusively, I'm talking about the people in the Arabian Peninsula and certainly in the Gulf, that they're not really capable of protecting themselves, or they're not willing to. And now we have this public discussion of a potential arrangement with Saudi Arabia to provide nuclear materials. I mean, this is just astonishing. It's almost as though we're not satisfied to come to some sort of arrangement with Iran. We want to blow the entire region up. And obviously, we turn to the Kurds in the hopes of mobilizing them. And I think the Iranians have skillfully eliminated any platforms or bases in Iraq or Syria from which the Kurds could launch against Iran. And I know that the Turks have been helpful to the Iranians in that regard. They've helped them target the Kurds. Both the Turks and the Iranians share the same interest, suppressing the Kurds, preventing them from helping to tear the region apart.
Yeah, in fact, there's been a lot of bombing up in this quadrant here of late on the near Erbil and where a lot of the Kurdish areas are here, and also inside this territory, as far, I think, even into Syria, but because Iran has been going after those. And I just wanted to go after here. This is the territory of Kuwait right here. And at least what Professor Morandi suggested, that there could potentially be some movement here in the south, and one wonders also from the southeast. What do you know about what capabilities Kuwait has to defend itself on the ground?
Nothing significant. I mean, they purchased some equipment from us. I don't know how much of it is operational. I don't know how resolute the people inside the Kuwaiti defense establishment are. And the other thing is that they've started hitting some of these desalination plants, or I guess desalination plants. I don't remember how many there are, 5, 6, 7. But you begin to destroy those. You have roughly 5 million people living there, depending upon these desalination plants. So it could end up being a situation where if they went in on the ground, and it would definitely come out of Iraq, there might not be much there to meet them.
And you know what? I was just thinking even about our time in that, our combat in that, not far from those locations there. And when I went back to Iraq in 2009, I think I did spend some time at Camp Bering in Kuwait doing some training in not far from where that map I was just showing you. And I remember there are, unless something has happened that I'm not aware of, there were literally no defenses up to the north. This is not like the Russia-Ukraine war where there's all these intricate fortifications and trenches and whatever else. It's just wide open desert you can drive through. And what would be the military capacity of, let's say, I mean, we're just hypothetical speaking here. Let's say that these alleged 150,000 resistance fighters from Shia in Iraq, which are ostensibly part of the Iraqi security forces, so actually part of the state, if they broke away and said, no, we're going to move on here, if from what you know, how hard would that task be for Kuwait to defend?
I think it's almost impossible. I know that King Abdullah from Jordan is now in the United Kingdom somewhere. That may be an indication of where things are headed in Jordan in the near future. I would imagine that the al-Sabah family has packed its bags and headed to London or somewhere else. You know, all of these places in the Gulf are very weak. These are not strong, cohesive societies. They don't maintain effective military establishments. We were looking a few years ago at what the average private in the UAE ground force is paid. I think it was something like the equivalent of $80,000 a year, plus, you know, whatever benefits are involved with that. Can you imagine that? And are you expecting these people that spend half of their day lying around at home, relaxing, and only spend perhaps half a day on active duty? I just don't see that happening. I don't see them doing much of anything. Everything is dependent upon us.
You know, I also remember you and I were in the 2nd U.S. Cavalry in 1990. We were in Grafenwehr Training Center doing a lot of training and exercises against what we thought was going to be a potential Soviet foe when, on August the 2nd of 1990, Saddam Hussein did invade into Kuwait and rolled all the way through in basically a day and set up his forces on the southern side there. But at that time, we had a couple of divisions, and I think George Bush sent the 101st and maybe the 82nd. I can't remember exactly who it was, but, you know, light fighters basically to put a presence there. And then we all started and moved up, and we had, I think, somewhere around 750,000 in the Army at that time. And all of our forces could go from Germany at that time and deploy into, the 7th Corps. We went in there. Does such a force exist now? If anyone, whether Iran and or Iraq forces do that, can we do a Desert Storm 2 type operation today?
Well, obviously not. We were lucky that Saddam Hussein, frankly, made the decision he did to effectively attack us. I mean, if it hadn't been for his decision to attack, I don't know that we'd have had much of an army, frankly, Dan, to fight with. If you recall, we had at the time almost 800,000 men in the United States Army. The Army was in a drawdown, and you had multiple divisions that had to be stripped out to bring the divisions we sent up to full strength. We weren't really ready, but the good news was that at least those of us who came from Europe were probably, I think, arguably in a higher state of training. But nevertheless, we were overtrained for the task, as you know, and we were very fortunate.
And what would happen if President Trump today was tempted to say, if an invasion happens, to say, I'm going to do my own Desert Storm and I'm going to move a bunch of troops over there? Can we do that?
No, first of all, we live in a new world today, and you could never build a lodgment unless you had enormous quantities of air and missile defense that you could surround the so-called lodgment area where you would collect and organize and assemble forces. And at the time, one of the things that we discussed privately was if we ever have to come back again in the future, given the direction of technology, we'd probably have to land in a place like Yenbu on the Red Sea and then cross the desert. Because if we tried to get into the Persian Gulf, we would be sunk or attacked or killed pretty rapidly. A lot of people realized, I think more people realized the danger that would be presented in the future than we appreciate right now. Admiral Zabrowski certainly understood that, as did the vice chairman of the Joint Chiefs, whose name escapes me at the moment. But there were people that were thinking this through. But ultimately, Dan, I think the real lesson is this. Even though there were smart people at the helm, nothing really changed inside the force.
And, you talk about if we land in Yanbu, which is about right there on the map there, that would be 1,000 kilometers that we would have to travel just to get to the battle space area right there, as opposed to when you and I went in, we went to Al Jabail, which was right here. That would be literally impossible right now with all of the Iranian firepower that they have all up and down this coast, for us to try and disembark with ro-ro ships and container ships to get our tanks and whatever else off the board here just to drive up to Kuwait. That would be nearly impossible right now. In fact, it might be absolutely impossible. What do you think?
Completely, without question. No doubt about it. And, the tanks are still equipped with these turbine engines. And those things, as you know, drank fuel. And even though you have this auxiliary power unit that's supposed to reduce the amount of fuel that you consume, if you're moving, it doesn't make any difference how fast you move. You consume the gas at roughly, I think it was 8 hours, 7.5 to 8 hours, and you're on empty. I mean, that's 7 or 8 hours of operation. You can't fight a war that way. That's why the notion of committing these forces in a place like Ukraine is absurd. Ukraine is enormous. You'd go a couple of 100 miles and everybody's standing around waiting for tons of fuel to arrive. It doesn't make any sense.
It doesn't. And in fact, it doesn't, whether it makes sense or not, we just don't have that capability anymore. So if that happens, the whole system is so much more vulnerable than it was in 1991. It's remarkable how less capable we are today. And I don't think President Trump keeps saying, and Secretary Hegseth said 2 days ago, repeated, we're the most powerful military on the planet. And yet we couldn't even do a Desert Storm 2 because of our limited capability. That's the reality of it.
Well, Dan, you got what is an echo? You got an echo? Okay.
I don't hear an echo. I don't. If you do, I'm not sure about that.
Is that? Yeah, I think this. Can you hear me now?
I can hear you fine. I have no problem hearing you.
Yeah, I think we have to understand that it's civilians in general, particularly people who are members of Congress. They're very impressed with glitz and glamour, shock and awe. You show them videotapes of explosions. They equate an explosion on the ground with an effect that is a war-winning effect. There's no understanding of how complex warfare is and the need for multiple capabilities being employed and orchestrated as an integrated force. There's just no understanding of that at all. So everybody is in the hunt for a silver bullet. Everybody wants to buy the silver bullet that will win the war. And we're finding out that there are no silver bullets unless you want to go the nuclear route. And we should talk about that because I think that's being discussed too.